my name is Darshit Thakkar. I am one of the technical product managers on Amazon Athena and EMR Trino. And
my name is BP. I'm a solution architect from AWS. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, all right. So just gonna quickly run through the agenda for today. I'm gonna quickly give you an overview about Amazon Athena in case you're not familiar with it. Then we're gonna talk about a quick demo on dbt Athena adapter. Then we are gonna talk about some optimization techniques of how you can get the best out of Amazon Athena and dbt together. And then we also have other AWS adapters like dbt Redshift and dbt Glue. So we are gonna compare and show you how the differences or in what use case you can use those adapters. All right, so let me start off with some backstory. As you all know, the modern applications, be it on any platform, they generate massive amounts of data every single day, right? You could have telemetry, you could have some logs, you could have some events, you could have some real-time data coming into your system. And all of that, they need to be analyzed in some form to make a data-driven decision, right? So the one way you could do that is form a data lake. And you can form a data lake using AWS S3, or you can have your own data lakes where you combine the data from all these applications and then eventually run analytics on them, run or power your applications, or do some sort of visualizations on your BI tools, such as QuickSight, or you can use them to power your machine learning models, right? So this is where Amazon Athena makes it easier for you to do any kind of analytics, mostly interactive analytics, and also batch workloads. So let me give you an overview of Amazon Athena, right? So the first thing that you see on your left is how simple and easy and instant start Amazon Athena is. Athena is a serverless service. You don't need to provision any resources. You just connect your data, you basically point Athena to where your data is living, and then you can start querying and start deriving insights out of it. It's a simple, near instant startup. There is no provisioning happening behind the scenes. It's always up and running, and you can get started quickly without waiting for any resources to build up. So you can use Athena to build interactive and advanced analytic applications, not just using SQL, but also with Python. Amazon Athena has a Python offering and a Spark offering as well, where you can use these services and connect your data that is on-premise or also living somewhere in your other database using connectors. It's open and flexible. We use ANSI SQL notation to run the SQL queries or to author the SQL queries. And you can have multiple compression types to make the most of your storage. So you wouldn't have to, we will give you or we will recommend some optimization techniques to get the best query performance and the cost performance, which would make it easier for you to store the data for a long time and also at the same time run analytics on them. Finally, it's cost effective. As I mentioned earlier, you're not provisioning any resources, so you are not paying for any resources that are running behind the scenes that are powering your queries. You're only paying for what you're using, right? So the moment you run your query, there is a simpler pricing model on $ per terabyte scanned, and based on the amount you scan, which is your data, we will charge you on that. Our customers have seen 30 to 90% on per query cost through compressions and other recommendations that we have. We have various blogs that talk about recommendations and optimization techniques. So our customers have seen 30 to 90% improvement in their costs. These are some of the highlights of our recent launches. So I think the one that we want to highlight the most every single time is we are 2.7x faster than open source. We have a blog out there of the techniques that we have used in order to get the performance improvement. Cost-based optimizer, I'm sure a lot of you would be aware of column and table statistics. We leverage Glue data catalog to gain access to the table and the column statistics, which are used in our query planning, which causes about 12 to 15% improvement in your query planning time and query execution time. We have one of our new release features sometime late last year, which is provision capacity. If you feel that on-demand capacity that Athena offers out of the box is not sufficient for you, you could still reserve some resources. And those resources are dedicated for your workloads and not shared. And if you have workload-intensive queries that are running, you can leverage provision capacity, and you can leverage provision capacity on your dbt workloads as well. We have federated views on your data mesh. You can create views using 30 different data sources using connectors. We also launched direct querying capabilities through 3 new S3 offerings, which is Express One Zone, Object Lambda, and Glacier. That basically is the 3 offerings that S3 released in terms of the lifetime of the data, and Athena can directly querying them without any additional setup. We also have direct integration with DataZone, CloudTrail Lake. CloudTrail Lake is our logging and analytical platform where you can have your applications send logs to, and then Athena can directly connect to CloudTrail without any additional setup in order to just start querying and making sense out of your logs. We also launched new connectors for Google Cloud Storage, Confluent, and IBM DB2. And finally, we had some improvements on our console, if you're a console user, where we launched Type Ahead, which can help you author queries much faster than before. I wanted to talk about the federated query as one of our distinguishing features. So as I mentioned earlier, your data could live anywhere. It could be on-premise, it could be on your third-party source, or it could be on S3. Athena makes it easier with the use of connectors and native integration with S3 to query the data where it is stored. So if you're just looking to do some interactive analysis without moving the data or without doing ETL, Athena makes it much, much easier to do that. It's also easy to set up and query. You basically log into the console, you configure your data source connector, and once we have the catalog information, you can start querying it quickly. Also, we have about 35 plus connectors that we work with. The most common one that we have used recently, the most common ones that the customers have used recently are Snowflake, Postgres, and MySQL. But there are other 35 connectors out there if it fits your need. We also have connectors with JDBC and ODBC drivers in case you want to query something on your on-premise data or some other data source. OK, now I want to get a little bit into how this fits into the DBT world, right? So just thinking about one of the use cases, think of a global e-commerce company. I'm not biased by taking that example, being Amazon being one of them. It just popped up in my mind. But imagine they have click data, purchase data in S3, and they also have financial data on-premise, which in some cases is a common use case because customers want to be a little restrictive where their financial information lives. So they might keep it on-premise, and they need to transform this raw data into some insights, right? So let's talk through some challenges that they face here. So these companies, they did not predict how much of the data would grow eventually, right? So the more and more customers they gain, the more data they generate, right? And when they initially set these infrastructure up, it was mostly on-premise, which eventually could not scale to the amount of data that was coming in, right? So they have limited infrastructure resources, which is causing operational inefficiencies, right? So now they're struggling on how to expand these resources to accumulate the amount of data that are coming in, dedicate IT resources on figuring out these problems, which is taking away attention from their main goal, which is deriving insights out of the data. It also leads, once this data grows, it also leads to slow query performance, right? You have multiple tables, you have multiple data sources that you're trying to join, which eventually leads to a slower query performance. Again, that leads to delayed insights, and I want to hit back the point that insights is what you want to get at first, rather than worrying about the infrastructure, right? And let's say if even you were to scale your infrastructure to meet these growing needs of the data, you would have a very high maintenance overhead. Let's say you keep adding instances to store your data so that you can analyze it and derive insights out of it. It would additionally add a lot more cost than what you're used to pay, right? So I think there was a Gartner research done recently that customers who started off at on-premise and are not able to scale are adding at least 30 to 35% more costs just to scale and accommodate the amount of data that they're getting now. So it leads to increase in the cost, and eventually it is taking away all the important resources that are focused on getting insights and making data-driven decisions, but they are spending it on getting the infrastructure up and ready to meet the demands of the data. So now let's look at, so BP, my colleague here, would demo how dbt Athena and dbt Athena adapter and Athena can work well together in one of the use cases that we will cover live in the demo.
Yeah, thanks for waiting while I was setting up the demo. So before I start get you excited to see how this in action, right? So just want to get a sense of how many of you actually are Athena user. Okay, we have some Athena user. How about who actually are dbt user? Yep, great. So I'm guessing that, since you're a dbt user, you're not actually using dbt on Athena. So, I believe that most of you are in the keynote earlier. So one of the announcements is actually on the Athena adapter, right? So, with this demo, I'm just going to show you how easy is it to use Athena to query data in S3. Okay, so I'm not sure that if you have data in your data lake in S3, so hopefully you can learn something from here, see how easy to query using Athena and leverage the dbt Athena adapter. So, first thing first, right? So we're talking about data in S3. So I'm going to show you that, hey, we have a sample data set that I created in S3. If you remember from the keynote this morning, we are talking about iceberg, right? I have some iceberg data sitting in my S3 bucket. So just show you. So I have like 4 iceberg table data set that actually, customer, date, and also the sales data. This is not Jefferson, by the way, but just a generic TPCDS sales data sitting in iceberg open format in my S3 bucket. So this is the data set itself. Then let me switch screen to Athena. So for you that are not familiar with Athena, right? So this is a Athena console from AWS console itself. So in Athena console, a couple of things, right? If you can see from the left-hand side, we have something called data catalog. So the default is AWS data catalog. And we have concept of a database, just similar to a database in a database world, right? But later I'm going to show you, in dbt, when you configure dbt to connect to Athena, how you set the database and the schema. But in Athena itself, there's a database and also in table. So you can see, right here, I have, those 4 tables that I showed you earlier in my S3 bucket, the customer, the date dimension, and also the sales data. So what happened is you can easily run a select statement. I'm sure that all of you are familiar, with select statement. You can just run the select statement, click running, within a couple of seconds, depends on your data set, you can actually get the result in the Athena console. So, this show you how easy is it to actually use Athena to query the data that's sitting on S3. So one thing I want to highlight is I actually did nothing to set up anything on the infrastructure itself. By just going to Athena console, having a data set in S3, then boom, it's ready for you to query, like what Darshit highlight on why our customer love to use Athena. So what actually is the next if we want to use dbt on Athena? So let me switch screen to dbt console, right? Before I run the model, I just want to show you how you actually set up the connection to Athena. So I'm sure that you're familiar with this dbt console. So in the connection, right? So I already set up the Athena connection, but a couple of things that I want to highlight. So Athena right now is available as one of the connector, right? If you go back to your environment, you can try that. You can see Athena there, but it wasn't there previously. So select the Athena, and then same thing, give a connection name. But a couple of things that I want you to take note of when you try out Athena. The first thing is the database. when you connect to Snowflake or Redshift, database is very clear. You just select the database name, put in the database name from your Snowflake or Redshift. But in Athena, the database name should be AWS Data Catalog. So if you remember, let me switch back to my Athena console, right? So in Athena, the data source, this is AWS Data Catalog. So this will be a database name in your dbt configuration, okay? Then the next thing I want to highlight is how about, then you might ask, hey, what happened to my actual database, the database name in Athena? So that will be the schema name when you're setting it up in dbt, okay? So that's the other two settings that you need to take note of. This is a S3 staging directory. So this is a temporary directory that will store the Athena query result. So you just have to identify a S3 bucket for that temporary storage. Then you put it here. The other thing is about S3 data directory. So if you remember, I have this S3 bucket that store my iceberg data, right? So you just have to copy the URL to this particular folder that contains the data set, and you put in this data directory, okay? So those are a couple of things that you need to take note when you set up the connections to Athena. So now the next thing is go back to your IDE for dbt. So I mentioned about the database and schema and table. So since you're familiar, you're a dbt user, you go back to your source YAML file. So the same thing, right? The database here is actually AWS data catalog, okay? And the schema is actually the database in Athena. Let me switch back to Athena console. So in here, you see a database. I call this database iceberg, right? So in the YAML configuration, just make sure that the schema is actually the database name in Athena. Then the rest of the table, it will be the same thing. So once you set up this in the YAML file, then you can generate your staging model, for instance. It will generate the staging model, and you can create your data mart that contain your business rule that you want to pull insight from. For instance, in this example, I'm just creating a data mart with a sales data, right? So it's basically just aggregate the sales and the profit information over a period of time, just simple as that. Then you can, run your dbt run, then it will build and create this dbt model back in Athena. So let me switch that back to Athena, right? So from Athena itself, once you run the dbt run, so depends on your configuration, right? So if I click the drop down on the database, this is a dbt underscore Athena. It's the database that created by the dbt model and contain the object. So I created two staging table, if you remember from my dbt console. So these two are the staging view that created in Athena, and this is the data mart that I'm talking about, contain the insight that you want is being created over there. So, you can actually query the data from Athena once you have the model. I can, create preview, then it will actually run a select statement on the data set and return the data. So again, this shows you how simple is it to use Athena, and also tips on when you try to connect to Athena running your dbt model. So hopefully this will help you to transition to try dbt on Athena. Now I'm going to switch back to Darshit for the next configuration. Let me switch the screen back. Give me a second.
Sorry, quick question. So what is the visualizations here? Like it should be table or like iceberg?
Sorry, say that again.
So what is the visualization for Athena? Like it should be table or iceberg?
It should be view. So right now it supports the view materializations.
And we can talk more after. Yeah. Okay, thank you, BP. All right, now let's look at some of the optimization techniques. which work well with Athena and dbt together. The first one, I think a lot of you would be familiar with the incremental models. So Athena does support, the dbt Athena adapter does support the incremental models. So what it basically does is the first time you run analytics or you run transformations, it will do a full table scan. Any transformations after that, it will try to run only on the new data and not the full data scan. So that basically saves you time and also the amount of data scanned on Athena. Partitioning your data, I think that is one of our biggest bets from Athena. The way you partition your data. We have a lot of blogs around of how well you can partition your data. I remember recently, like last week, I was running a query which was taking about 15 to 16 minutes. I just partitioned on a date column, and that literally brought down my execution time to 2.5 minutes. So until you implement the partition, you would know how strongly it would help you with the query performance. Store data using OTFs. I think there was a question on Iceberg as well. So Athena works well with OTFs. They are highly performant. We also work well with native Parquet storage on S3, but OTF, if that's your game, definitely one of the things you can use. Leverage ephemeral models and views. This is mostly on the dbt side. Use CTAS for complex data. So instead of running complex queries, one of the optimization techniques is to create temporary tables using CTAS, which is create tables as select, where what you're essentially doing is reducing the data set to the amount to the data you want to focus on for analysis. So rather than running a scan on a 5-year-old data, you would like to focus on a certain segment where you can create a temporary table using CTAS, which reduces your data set that you want to query on. I don't want to go through all of it, but I'll just highlight one of the query result caching feature. So Athena does support query result reuse if you're familiar with it. So if your data is not changing frequently, you can turn that feature on, and you can set the time limit you want to reuse the results for, which basically comes to you for free. So Athena would, if you have that feature turned on, and if the query is the same, Athena just gives you the result back for free instead of charging you again for the data scan. And there are other optimization techniques. I'm sure there are more optimization techniques beyond these 9, and we have documented some of them on our blogs as well. I finally want to talk about the other adapters that we have. We have the Redshift adapter. It is, so if you have a data warehouse on Redshift, you can use the dbt Redshift adapter, mostly for OLAP processing. And you want to run data transformations on Redshift, you can use the adapter. It also supports incremental data processing, so does Athena. And currently, it is compatible with dbt Core and dbt Cloud. We also have dbt Glue adapter that is currently compatible with dbt Core. It is based on Spark. So if you're familiar with Spark and you want to run ETL jobs, you can leverage the dbt Glue adapter. It is scalable for big data. We have lots of customers using it as well. And then finally, dbt Athena adapter. We have serverless, mostly used for SQL transformations on serverless architecture where you don't want to provision your resources. You have reusable modular data models, again, incremental models as well. Very simple pricing. You pay for what you use rather than having your resources running. And as of today, I'm sure you might have heard on the keynote, dbt Athena adapter is also cloud compatible, so not just core, but it works well with dbt Cloud as well. And I believe that's it.
Thank you so much. So we will still be here around.
Yeah,
like,
we'll be around if you want to chat.
But back to your point, like if you remember from the keynotes earlier in the demo, if you want that materialization to be Iceberg compatible, so there's a configuration up there in the YAML file. You need to specify the config with the materializations equals to Iceberg. So in my demo, I do not have that, so that's why it's materialized as view, but not as Iceberg. If you want to use Iceberg, just use that config in the YAML file.
So when you were running this dbt model, it was creating those tables underneath views, so the preferential views. So how is that, like when on your screen here it wasn't under tables, it was under views?
Yeah, so because like in my config, right, I set the materializations as view, so that's why it's set at view, just similar to like the view like in your cloud data warehouse.
So it just created the federated view. It did not really create the storage in the S3 for the final model, right? For your final model, so you had two staging models, right? And your final model was built on those two staging models. So your final model, was that just a federated view, or it had its physical storage as well?
So that's view, right? So it will be the federated view, not like a physical storage, in S3. If you want that to be physical storage, so you have to like use the iceberg format so that it will be physically stored as an iceberg file in your S3 bucket that you specify.
Yeah, we can probably show you the configuration for the demo. That would help, yeah.